The G20 summit in Johannesburg did not open with applause, nor with the usual carefully choreographed diplomatic smiles. It opened with an uneasy silence. Delegates felt it immediately, something had shifted. This was not simply another global gathering. This was the first G20 held on African soil, and the first time Africa had enough leverage to unsettle the world's most powerful nation. And before the United States could reassert its dominance, before the summit could settle into routine discussions, a voice from Namibia broke the silence. A voice clear, unapologetic, and carrying the weight of a continent tired of being patronized. It was not a greeting. It was the opening shot of a new political era.
We should not discuss, negotiate with the poverty mentality as if we are begging. We cannot be a beggar in the international community when we have resources. We must have leverage and even bring them to the point they can beg us. It's possible, it depends how you are approaching it.
These are the words of a nation fully aware that it holds the keys to the world's clean energy future. When President Netumbo Nandi Ndaitwah stepped into Johannesburg, the South African delegation immediately recognized that Namibia was not here to merely attend, Namibia was here to shape the narrative. And the interesting part is this: Washington understood it too. Namibia's uranium can replace the supply chain the United States lost in Niger after its political fallout. Namibia's green hydrogen is already being targeted by Germany and the European Union as a strategic pillar for their energy transition. Namibia has resources. Namibia has leverage. Namibia has a voice that resonates far beyond its borders. And, above all, Namibia has the kind of independence that many African nations admire and aspire to.
The U.S. is back on the international stage as a leader. We have whittled down the G20 back to basics. We are making it work for the American people better than ever. We have the G20 had become basically the G100 this past year.
When South Africa decided to invite more than 40 nations to the Johannesburg summit, Washington reacted instantly. We have whittled down the G20 back to basics. The G20 had become basically the G100 this past year. This was not simply mockery. It was concern, even fear. Analysts in Washington understood the implications. If Africa proved it could steer the G20 toward a more multipolar and inclusive model, American influence in global economic governance would inevitably shrink. So the United States turned to a familiar playbook. Do not participate. Do not legitimize. Do not cooperate. Instead of sending the Secretary of State or the Treasury Secretary, Washington announced it would send a chargé d'affaires, one of the lowest-ranking representatives in its diplomatic hierarchy. It was a cold signal. We do not consider this summit important. But South Africa saw it differently. Pretoria understood that a superpower refusing to attend does not diminish the value of the G20, it exposes its own anxiety. And Namibia? President Nandi Ndaitwah's bold declaration reminded Washington that if Africa is allowed to speak without filters, a new political vocabulary could spread across the continent, one built on sovereignty, not deference. South Africa prepared its counterstrike. Presidential spokesperson Vincent Magwenya delivered it publicly on X. The president will not hand over to a chargé d'affaires. It was a rare diplomatic slap, a clear message that Africa would no longer accept symbolic disrespect.
I will be meeting with the African heads of state and government who we have invited to be part of the G20 Leaders Summit. We will also have the chairperson of the African Union as well as the African Union Commission, who, as we know, the AU is now a member of the G20, as a result of our campaign that South Africa should not be the only country or only representative of the continent in the G20 process. And we are very pleased that we won that debate. There was a lot of opposition, but we finally won the debate, that our continent must formally be represented, like the EU is formally represented in the G20. And because you are all Africans, you can give that a round of applause. Now, at this meeting that we are going to hold with the African leaders, I hope to showcase the extent and the scope of investment by South African companies in the various African countries. Now, this will be an opportunity to reaffirm the commitment of South African companies to the development of the continent. We will reiterate our shared responsibility to create conducive and enabling conditions for doing business in each other's countries. I've held the belief that we do need to meet as African leaders to discuss the various issues that are troubling to business, and not just discuss them in a theoretical way at the AU Assembly, but to discuss them amongst ourselves, having heard from business, but also create an opportunity where business will be present so that business can talk to African leaders. And we will create that opportunity, having started this process. We acknowledge the work that has been undertaken by the B20 to connect the business community with governments. Many of you gathered here have made significant contributions to the B20 deliberations during our G20 presidency. And I've seen that as a great contribution. And it hasn't only been the B20. We are actually president of a very unique G20 process, much as it isn't much appreciated elsewhere in the world, where it is said that we are convening a G100 summit. But we are convening an inclusive summit. Today, the Deputy President opened the G20 Social Summit. And a few minutes ago, I met with media people, journalists and all of them, who have corralled a number of media people in 19 countries that are part of the G20, and they've come up with a G20 media declaration dealing with things of like freedom of the press and the persecution of journalists in various parts of the world. So our G20 is rather special because it speaks to the theme that we chose: solidarity, equality, and sustainability. And I do wish we had added the word inclusion, because it's become such a hated word in the world. We should have added that because our G20 is about inclusion. As South African executives, you have a critical role to play in efforts to drive inclusive growth across our continent and across the globe. As the most industrialized and diverse economy on the continent, with a vibrant and engaged business community, and may I say also a vocal business community, South Africa is well positioned to enable investment and trade across the continent. Domestically, we are seeing the green shoots of an emerging economic recovery. The most recent employment figures are encouraging. They may change and go down at times, but the trend will be an upward movement trend. We are set to record another primary budget surplus and are on a path to reduce our sovereign debt. And we congratulate our colleagues in Treasury for having crafted a rather solid medium-term budget policy statement. And thanks to Minister. Our country has been taken off, which is another positive, the FATF grade list after 2 years of hard work. Last week, the S&P upgraded our country's sovereign credit rating, and our electricity supply, which was a problem that dogged us for a number of years, has dramatically improved, and we are seeing progress in the turnaround at our ports and at our railways. So things are moving up. The reform agenda, which is transforming our network industries and our other accompanying areas of focus, which include crime, which include fighting corruption, which include working on our local government, all those are beginning to move in the right direction. In a complex, despite these positive developments, however, I should add that there are still some headwinds. In a complex and uncertain global economic environment, we need to strengthen the capacity of our economy to compete, to produce, and to trade. Over many years, South Africa's companies have become innovative and adaptive, skillfully navigating enormous challenges and going into difficult markets, which a number of people, investors and others and critics wondered what was wrong with South African companies as they surged into very dangerous territories and uncertain territories. I remember very well I was chairman of MTN, which Mcebisi Jonas has now inherited. When MTN invested in Nigeria, people were alarmed and said, have they lost their marbles? Have they lost their heads? Those South African companies have been brave, bold, and resilient. And these capabilities that we should draw on as we broaden our horizons and explore new markets for trade and investment on our own continent are what we should use as a great foundation. The implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area will profoundly transform market access for South African goods, services, and investments. It will help to drive regional integration and value chains across borders. It will expand opportunities for businesses to access a wider African market of about 1.4 billion people at the moment and rising even more when we reach 2.5 billion people. And currently with a combined GDP of $3.4 trillion US. Grounded in our shared belief that South Africa's growth and prosperity is in the end intrinsically intertwined with that of the African continent. During apartheid days or years, we never saw South Africa as connected to the African continent. But we are inherently African. And therefore, through business acumen, business involvement, we must see ourselves as being fully African. And I'm rather proud that many of our companies have gone into various African markets. And we should do this as we continue to amplify our common heritage and shared future. We must undertake our activities, investment activities and otherwise, with greater purpose. As Africa grows and prospers, so will South Africa also grow. We are therefore calling on South African companies to be part of setting our country and our continent on a new economic trajectory. This is a task that we need to undertake together as government and as business, to look at opportunities beyond our borders and to be part of building a better Africa. I'd like this to be then the start of a new chapter. But then you are going to ask, what is it that government will do for us as businesses as we undertake this work? And of course, many of you will be able to say, government, yes, has supported us, has helped us, but some of you will say, at times we felt stranded. At times we felt that we're alone as businesses. Now, as Minister Lamula has said, the strategy that is being developed and will finally be approved by Cabinet is a strategy that we believe will give much more support to your businesses, to your operations as you surge into the African continent. Now, we have dubbed this engagement a Getaway Africa because we want to build a Team South Africa concept as we support you in your businesses. This approach will give more credence, as I said, to the notion of South Africa as a gateway into the African continent. Let it be the work that we can undertake. From our government perspective, we will be ready, willing, and prepared through giving government support, diplomatic support to the businesses. And we will be deploying even more knowledgeable people throughout our various embassies and consulates on the continent who will give you great support, as Minister Lamula said, be able to give market intelligence, be able to give a full analysis of the laws and the regulations of the markets that we will be operating in. But in order for us to do so more intelligently, it is important that we should hear from you as businesses as we seek to build this Team South Africa concept that will enable us to move as one into the continent, where you are going through your various activities going to make big ticket investments. The government will want to be there to support. The government will want to be there not so much to give a South African stamp on those types of investments, but to demonstrate that your government, South Africa, is there to support the work that you do. We as a government are playing a key role on the diplomatic level in various parts of our continent with peace building, with skills development, and also social assistance. We do want to give much more support to an area that is so important, not only to your businesses, but to our country as well, so that South Africa becomes much more united and working together with our businesses. We have succeeded extremely well in working with you here at home. We've built a solid team between government, yes, labor, as well as business. And we've been able to address a number of challenges that have enabled us to push forward the reform process that we are pushing forward with. Therefore, when it comes to trade, investments, and surging into the continent for business purposes, we want to use government support, diplomatic support to assist you all as we engage. So tonight, I'd like to hear more from you, what your challenges are, what your expectations are, what your fears are, what the risks are, and how government can help. This is why I'm glad that the minister has saved his job by convening this engagement tonight. Thank you very much.
Ramaphosa's address was not emotional retaliation. It was choreography, deliberate, precise, and strategic. The United States mocked the summit as the G100. Ramaphosa flipped that insult into a virtue by reframing it as inclusivity, not excess. He reminded the world that this was the first G20 held on African soil. And therefore Africa had earned the right to convene widely, not narrowly. Washington sent a low-ranking charge d'affaires. Ramaphosa countered without shouting. Respect requires presence, not symbolic attendance. He made it clear that African leadership is not something to be delegated downward. The U.S. fears losing its seat at the center. Ramaphosa broadened the table, placing Africa squarely in the middle of global deliberations. He did so not through confrontation, but by grounding his message in values the U.S. cannot openly oppose: multilateralism, equality, and shared development. His most effective move was restraint. He never attacked Washington directly. He elevated the conversation above American objections, turning Africa's dignity into the moral high ground and forcing the world to listen. In the end, the G20 summit on African soil did more than expose a diplomatic clash. It revealed a quiet truth the world can no longer ignore: Africa is no longer standing at the doorway of global power, waiting to be let in. Africa is stepping inside, on its own terms. From Namibia's unapologetic voice to South Africa's unwavering stance, this summit marked the beginning of a new political vocabulary, a language of dignity, sovereignty, and equal worth. And no amount of mockery from Washington could silence that shift. Instead, it amplified it. If you believe Africa deserves a seat at every table where the future is decided, if you believe nations like South Africa and Namibia speak not only for themselves but for millions across the continent, then let your voice matter as well. Like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. Because this conversation does not end here. The world is changing. Africa is rising. And together, we will make sure this momentum does not fade, not today, not tomorrow, not ever.